In 2024, I made a video essay discussing censorship and anti-art attitudes held by politicians, self-publishing sites, payment processors, and credit card companies. The focus of my ire at the time was the literary world and the adult film industry. At the time, the two main self-publishing outlets for literature were Amazon and Smashwords. The two main outlets for adult film were OnlyFans and Just for Fans. In both cases, the former were more restrictive and censorious than the latter. Since then, Smashwords has changed into a purely digital storefront, with its self-publishing aspect merged with the previously more restrictive drafted digital. I've considered making a follow-up video focused on the visual art world with sites like Instagram, DeviantArt, Redbubble, Fourth Wall, and so on, which, yes, are highly restrictive and censorious. It's on my list of ideas I keep on my wall over there and cross out one by one with a black marker because crossing things off feels like accomplishing something, which makes me feel like a good boy, and that's always nice. Speaking of, good boy. At this point, you may be thinking, oh, this soft-faced guy talking about censorship just called himself a good boy. This is probably a shameless video made by a pervert trying to defend perversion. Well caught. But more importantly, this is a video by an artist vehemently defending art, even art I despise. These photos and more, I take them, I do a lot of drawing, I do a lot of writing, I do a lot of composing. So I've been thinking about going in on the visual art side of things. Perhaps I'd give a history of the theater industry's own long fight against censorship, from Hair to the NEA 4. Maybe I will make that video soon, but this is about video game. In July 2025, video game storefronts / publishers Steam and itch.io, which I will refer to as itch.io from now on because that's more fun for me to say, both cracked down on not safe for work video games that they previously hosted. Of course, this pissed off the gamers, and gamers fancy themselves as a group you do not piss off. For the sake of the internet, for art, and for speech itself, I hope that they're right. 1. Collective shout. The crackdown on NSFW games on Steam and itch.io came about seemingly due to the targeted attacks of the Australian group Collective Shout. I don't do an Australian accent. No, so sorry. Collective Shout first turned their attention to the two platforms as a result of going after the non-con game No Mercy, which they managed to get pulled from Steam and blocked entirely in Australia, Canada, and the UK. Based on their description of the game, I have to say it is icky. I agree that it is icky. I don't agree that it should have been banned because it's icky, and I especially don't think it should be illegal. The sort of government censorship the Australian government engages in is gross. We might get to that a bit later, though. Collective Shout launched in 2010. If you go on Collective Shout's website, you'll see a lot of talk about protecting children, an admirable goal. As you're first reading their Q&A section, you might think they're sort of reasonable. Their complaints about sexualization and objectification don't allow for proper nuance, but surrounded as they are by comments around campaigning against subjecting minors to such things, you go, well, yeah, doing either of those things to a kid is bad and wrong. Good on you, Collective Shout. Fight the good fight. But then you keep reading, and you realize their mission is not really to protect children. In their answer to the question, "Are you against sex?" they quote anti-porn activist Gail Dines. Dines said, "You can't be pro-porn and pro-sex. You have to pick one." Oh. The only conclusion you can make from reading this is that they wish to eliminate all erotic art, be it erotic film, NSFW video games, explicit comics and manga, or erotica itself. This is a pro-censorship, anti-art stance. As The Guardian puts it, Collective Shout, a small but vocal lobby group, has long called for a mandatory internet filter that would prevent access to adult content for everyone in Australia. You might then ask, are they SWERFs, meaning sex worker exclusionary radical feminists? The answer to that is yes. They are against all sex work. They dislike the very existence of OnlyFans, and they paternalistically insist that no woman can truly freely choose to partake in any form of sex work. When asked about consensual sexual acts between adults, they again assume that they know best. They know better than you. They suggest, without outright saying it, that no woman can consent to sexually submissive or intense acts. The presence of a sexualizing misogynistic culture entirely removes the potential for consent to non-vanilla acts in their mind. Go watch ContraPoints' video over Twilight's for some more interesting deep dives into people who think like that. Now let's go back to their statements on sexualization and objectification. Both are issues in society when taken at large. Both do contribute to misogyny and violence against women. Objectification also plays a large part in racism, especially against black men and women. To quote a footnote in a book I'm working on, certain sex-negative feminists, like Catherine McKinnon, define gender as opposed to sex based on whether one is the objectified or objectifier, with all who are objectified being women. This would mean objectification is the mechanism through which patriarchy exists. So, according to McKinnon, despite being a gay man, when I let other men objectify me, I become, in that instant, a straight woman. Some real mind-blowing thought going on here. To further quote myself from that book, whose working title is Impossible Kinks, some people enjoy being objectified. For some, it's the only form of submission that gets them going. When you enjoy something that is frowned upon, or perhaps you're intellectually opposed to beyond your arousal, this can cause some psychological distress. Do we judge the feminist who enjoys being objectified in the bedroom as a bad feminist? Do we tell the gay man who likes being called the F-slur by a partner an enemy to queer liberation? I assume not. Doing either wouldn't particularly further causes of justice, destroy those sexual expressions, or do much of anything besides further entrench within them a sense of debilitating shame. Why might you like being dehumanized? It can be as simple as a degradation kink or as annoyingly vague as sometimes we just find something hot. Perhaps you've been subjected to objectification in some way that has harmed you, and sexualizing this pain and trauma makes it easier to handle or work through. Transforming trauma into sexualization is a form of sublimation. Sublimation, I'm no longer quoting myself here, is an important psychological aspect to both sex and the human condition as a whole. This isn't me meant to be shilling a book that isn't finished, though. When I mentioned they were against OnlyFans, you might be wondering if they had anything to do with that brief period of time where OnlyFans decided it was going to ban all adult content before realizing that was a shitty anti-art move of idiotic censorship. OnlyFans originally made this move supposedly at the behest of credit card companies and Stripe, two of our major foes in this video, which we will get to later. In their article about this brief period of time, Collective Shout said, "In May 2020, we signed a joint letter calling on credit cards to cease processing payments to pornography websites. That letter led to many communications with major credit cards, MasterCard, and Visa. Movement Director Melinda Tenkard-Reist was part of a global briefing of MasterCard executives in February alongside our US partners." On July 19, 2025, they claimed victory over Steam's decision to remove hundreds of games from their storefront due to Collective Shout's pressure campaign aimed at payment processors and credit card companies. They claim that in response, they've been inundated with all sorts of vile threats, which means this is a great time to pause and say that while I think Collective Shout is an anti-art organization that stands against speech, expression, sex, and, ironically, women, if you threaten these people, you are scum. No one deserves to be treated in such a way. Cruelty, actual cruelty, is inexcusable. I will not defend you. Back to your regularly scheduled program. Collective Shout was co-founded by Melinda Tenkard-Reist. A 2012 article in the Sydney Morning Herald describes her as a religious conservative in feminist clothing. That article talks at length about how, while not necessarily being for government regulation, Reist is anti-abortion and paints abortion as violence against women. To connect the dots to now, it's not hard to imagine that were she to succeed in ridding the world of porn, she might next turn her eyes to ridding the world of abortion, on a save the women and girls moral crusade. This article goes on to describe the evidence in Rice's anti-porn book, meant to talk about how erotic art is destroying our brains, as thinner on the ground. I find that funny, and likely accurate. Anti-porn moral crusaders don't tend to have the best grasp on how fiction works, in my experience. An article for the Catholic Church, a local diocese, makes it clear that Rice believes in pornography addiction, something many anti-erotica, pro-censorship, anti-art types claim to believe in. I say claim to believe in. There are mentions about dopamine hits, like she's been watching too many Andrew Huberman podcast episodes and got bought in by the pseudoscientific assertion that anything which provides increases in dopamine is addictive. No. In case you were not aware, pornography addiction is not real. Flat out. Behavioral addictions at large are not real psychological diagnoses. The people who insist that they are, like the Chinese Communist Party, are searching for science to support their authoritarian goals. The CCP did this with video game addiction, another thing which is not real. See my videos on Genshin Impact, Andrew Huberman, and my first censorship video. Of course, an anti-porn, anti-sex, anti-abortion, anti-science religious conservative who calls herself a feminist is also going to be anti-trans. Rice is the founder of an anti-trans organization in Australia. This will be important later when we talk about how these censorship pushes are not actually about NSFW art. Caitlin Roper is the campaign manager at Collective Shout. Based on her social media profiles, like many swerfs, she is entirely against surrogacy. She uses the term trans-identified males because she's a transphobic bigot. These are, for the most part, religious conservatives trying to mask their conservative agenda through the language of progressivism. That doesn't mean, though, that they don't make any good points. I agree with their opposition to Andrew Tate. Though I don't agree with banning realistic sex toys or robots, I do share concerns over the ethics of abusing realistic though non-sentient creations a la Westworld. I approach that from a more theoretical aspect though, and I think it's in need of more research. I find common ground with concerns about AI and deepfake pornography. See my video talking about the dehumanization of Taylor Swift. Based on the statements of their founder, it does not seem like evidence is particularly something Collective Shout is all that interested in though. They don't care about studies into fantasy, eroticism, or art. They don't care about art itself, in my opinion. They're not really that interested in the complicated field of psychology, and especially not the more complicated subfield of historical psychological comparisons. Were women treated better before widespread access to porn? If we look at the history of politics, no. If we look at idealized history, sure. According to a deleted article by Anna Valens, Collective Shout has a history of misrepresenting artworks, claiming that they are pro-abuse despite clear anti-abuse messages. This includes the game Detroit Become Human. Valens wonders about Collective Shout's potential connections to other anti-porn activist groups in the UK and the US, and their efforts not merely against erotic art, but against art in general. The owners of Vice requested this article be taken down, and it was. Valens and Vice then separated. It was not an amicable separation. There is bad blood between them. Why was this, Savage Ventures? In my opinion, it seems as if they might support corporate attacks on the First Amendment. At the very least, it is suspicious, and, in my opinion, indicates an anti-art, anti-sex mindset. What they are, Collective Shout, is a conservative religious group with a specific moral outlook that they will twist any and all evidence to match. They will then wrap their censorious goals in the language of social justice and other campaigns so as to make it easy to paint anyone who opposes them on any issue as people who wish to harm women and children. This is a dishonest way of arguing. It also happens to be a highly effective way of arguing. In the summer of 2025, censorship is on the rise in the guise of protectionism. This is the way things are always pitched. The theater of safety is more important than both actual safety and freedom. And of course, because people are used to this, actual efforts toward protection are seen as theater. Authoritarianism becomes when you tell me to do something, but when I tell you to do something or to not do something, that's merely protecting people. China cracks down on gender expression, art, queerness, and video games, all in the guise of protecting its citizens. Hamas slaughters Israeli citizens in the name of protecting Palestine. Israel slaughters innocent Palestinians in the name of protecting Israel. Everyone will always justify their action. Most people rationalize their way into being the good guys, no matter what it is that they're doing. That's just part of the human condition. And so they will argue from the point of view that they are not merely correct, but that they are the moral good. They are the superheroes. Sometimes this leads to ignoring facts, dismissing facts, making facts up. It involves trampling over others and justifying said trampling because those guys are the bad guys. To this I say, erotic art is art. As an artist, I must defend it. It is my duty. So I view Collective Shout not as an organization that aims to improve the world, but as one which wishes to constrict and imprison it, all the while telling us we should be grateful for the bars they pull down around us. If we aren't, they will say we are demons who wish the worst upon the most vulnerable. This is the way we all argue. Luckily for me, I'm right. 2. Itch.io and Steam. According to Anna Valens' deleted article, Collective Shout managed to get just under 500 games banned from Steam. Despite Valve, Steam's owner, being quite a large and powerful group themselves, like a macro giant, as far as the public is aware at time of recording, Valve didn't push back on this, like, at all. They voted immediately. They did not use their power to defend art, games, or speech. They decided credit card companies should be allowed to control people's money. Itch.io is a smaller and less powerful company. After the attention of the anti-art activists was aimed at Itch.io, they delisted all NSFW games from their storefront. Itch.io claimed that they had to take this immediate drastic action to avoid losing all access to payment processors, but that this is not their permanent solution, nor a permanent decision on every single game that they have de-indexed. This is actually a bit interesting to me, because a month or so ago, before this all went down with Collective Shout, I was researching Itch.io and the ability to monetize erotic games on the site. This led me to their payment processors, Stripe and PayPal. Both processors came up in my previous video and are notoriously anti-erotic art. PayPal nearly led to the death of literary self-publisher Smashwords before the writing community joined together to give them a massive righteous bitch slap. So my understanding was that Itch.io had effectively already banned the monetization of erotic games, and those that were on the site were being allowed despite the policies of PayPal and Stripe. This confused me. Was Itch.io being lenient, or was it unaware? As such, when the news broke out about the delisting due to the Steam and Collective Shout situation, I wasn't surprised. It made sense to me. I thought it was still quite bad, but it wasn't shocking. It seemed, in fact, inevitable. As Edwin Evans Thurwell puts it, Itch.io has been asking developers to comply with payment processor regulations for a while, but they have not hitherto tried to enforce this systematically. According to his article, Itch.io is currently searching for payment processors who are more accepting of art and who do not believe they are the regulators of free speech. Now, that's all good and well. Like, it is good boys and well, and I do want to give Itch.io credit here. At the same time, I am a bit cautious, skeptical, and disappointed with this idea if it is true that this search is recent. Itch.io has known the positioning of PayPal and Stripe likely since the OnlyFans debacle at the start of the 2020s. They were certainly aware of it when they started telling developers that their processors don't like adult content. So then, if they only just started this search, as it seems, why did they not start so immediately upon realizing they were facing the barrel of a censorship gun? If they have been in search for such a long time, they should inform the public of this, and why it has taken such a long time, and why they refuse to say anything about this search up until now, and why they have refused to say that they have been searching for one. Why was it not until there was a massive uprising against censorship do they feel the need to make a statement caring about artists and erotic art? To be clear, do not send hate to the team at Itch.io. Do not send hate to anyone. Cruelty is unacceptable. I will not defend you. Itch.io, you are late to your duty. I do not know why you have waited so long, nor do I know why you did not attempt starting an uprising in defense of art during the Biden administration. I understand you not wanting to risk everyone's livelihood. That's fair. I understand you cannot stand up to the credit card companies and payment processors on your own. That's fair. I am not calling your recent moves cowardly. I am calling your long-term moves up until now cowardly, because they are. And I hope your efforts in search of a new processor is a step out of the shadows into actual bravery and actual defense of art. Actually, right before I was about to record this video, Itch.io actually released a new statement. They are allowing free adult content back up on their site. There was no statement in this issue about whether or not this allows for free content that credit card companies and payment processors traditionally take issue with, which we'll get into in the next sections, generally the same types of content Collective Shout pretends to care about. They then put forward a statement from Stripe, the same kind of statement Stripe has put out before in these situations, where Stripe blames the banks and pressures from financial institutions on preventing them from processing payments for erotic works. I call bullshit on this from Stripe, and I don't think itch.io should uncritically regurgitate this, as it seems to me to be an effort from Stripe to get the gamers angry about this to cease complaining to them because they don't want to change their attempts to censor speech. Perhaps this was part of a deal where Stripe would allow itch.io to have free content so long as they laundered this statement, taking the blame off of Stripe. As for Steam, well, at least for now they still allow some. In his article, Edwin mentions the International Game Developer Association's statement, a statement I actually do not think is that good because they fail on their duty to defend art, even gross, disgusting, immoral art. They suggest alternative payment processors for stores like itch.io. So let's talk about 3. Payment processors. I'm going to repeat myself a little bit here. This section will include bits from my previous censorship video, though performed by me now instead of copy-pasted clips because I don't like reusing clips. There was a period of time when the content you're allowed to publish on Smashwords that you can't on Amazon was also banned on Smashwords. Why? Well, quite openly because PayPal threatened them and other publishers. Eventually, PayPal relented, and Smashwords once more allowed that content. According to Reuters, PayPal told ebook distributors earlier this year that the original policy was in place, partly because the banks and credit card companies it works with restrict such content. But PayPal is far from innocent in this ascetic nonsense. They back down from erotica for the most part, but they still have puritanical attitudes towards art. When Gumroad decided to smash its creators with a ban hammer, who did TechCrunch point the finger at? PayPal and Stripe explicitly, the 2 payment processors used by itch.io. When Gumroad was in the news about this, that's when itch.io should have started looking for a new payment processor. Not now. PayPal's policies don't let you buy or sell sexually oriented digital goods or content delivered through a digital medium. Now you might think that would logically include ebooks. It doesn't, kind of, because they hit a sleeping giant with that and rightfully received a massive criticism from the literary world that smacked them back into this century, a similar bashing to what they are getting now as they and others attack the video game industry. It is a pro-censorship, anti-sex, pro-aesthetic, anti-expression sentiment. They also aired in a statement to The Guardian about the recent censorship trend in video games. When asked about the Steam and itch.io situation, PayPal said they won't support illegal content. That's interesting. Erotica and pornography are both legal. PayPal restricts legal purchases. Fictionalized portrayals of things such as incest, non-con, dub-con, drug uses, and violence are all legal. In the US, they are protected. PayPal, in response to the censorship push to get rid of legal speech, said they don't support illegal content. Isn't that interesting? I wonder, do they think that content should be illegal? Do they mistakenly think that content is illegal? Are they pretending that it is? Are they making a political argument? Are they fighting for restrictions on the First Amendment? Either their spokesperson made a serious error in a comment to the press, or PayPal is an enemy of art and of speech. I sure hope they clarify. Perhaps you should call and ask them about this comment, talk about the Guardian article, and express your concern and confusion. PayPal's sentiment is the one held by Stripe. Stripe's FAQ reads, "For now, due to various reasons, including requirements that apply to Stripe as a payment processor, requirements from our financial partners, and the potential wish exposure to Stripe, we can't currently work with businesses that sell or offer adult content or services." You might be thinking, wow, the phrase various reasons including sure is vague and it's probably hiding some internal decisions based on bullshit. And I bet good money on you being right on that, yeah. Money that Stripe wouldn't let me use, of course. Speaking of Stripe, Blue Sky user Pitch Dark Edge alleges when they called Stripe about the issue of gaming censorship, since Stripe is one of the payment processors itch.io uses, the representative hung up after saying they're not allowing purchases of LGBT content. Now, in good faith, this is assumedly a mistake by a service person. If not, put a pin in that because that's an important conversation about how this isn't actually about sex. Wise is another payment processor. You can get a debit card through them. Transfer money, international transfers, well, what do they say? They don't let you use them for adult content that is visual in nature. Erotic audio is probably safe. Erotica, well, you read that with your eyes. So is that only safe if it's an audiobook or braille form? Or is the written word okay? If so, does that mean text-based erotic games are okay with Wise? Cash App doesn't let you use it for NSFW of any sort. Venmo is owned by PayPal, so guess what they do and don't allow. Businesses are not allowed to use Apple Pay if they sell pornography, though what they mean by that is not specified, so you can assume that's any and all NSFW content, but it might not be. One of the suggested alternatives mentioned in the last section is CC Bill. Now, CC Bill is better in that they do allow adult services to use their product. They are very explicit about this. They do support erotic art. They don't support all erotic art, though. Their acceptable use page under unacceptable content subsection 4 says you may not use them if your site includes, by any measure, the posting or display of any image or wording depicting or related to extreme violence, incest, snuff, scat, or the elimination of any bodily waste on another person, mutilation, or rape anywhere on the site in a sexual or erotic manner, including the URL and meta tags. I know no one wants to be that person. I don't particularly want to be that person. But this is still an anti-art pro-censorship stance. All of these, in a fictional context, are examples of legal speech. They are protected expressions. Despite fear-mongering about obscenity laws, art that depicts these things is still art and therefore passes the Miller test. The only erotic gore I have seen and not been thoroughly disgusted by is the manga MADK. It's not typically for me. I don't find extremely violent sexual fantasies to be particularly moral, but they are lawful artistic expressions, and to be honest, if they weren't lawful, I would be forced into the position of lobbying for their legalization. CC Bill is better than Stripe and PayPal in the same way that Smashwords is better than Amazon. Or actually, strike that, that's not true. CC Bill is actively worse than Smashwords, and I find some of Smashwords' limitations to be immoral and anti-art. Another suggested processor is Verotel. I could not find an acceptable use policy on them, and I did not find online commentary about their limitations if they do exist beyond assumedly banning actual illegal content. The website Porn Webmaster suggests other payment processors. Further suggested processors, I likely couldn't find relevant acceptable use policies for Truvo, Epic, ProBiller, SegPay, NetBilling, though it seems to have good reviews, Vendo, CentroBill, CommerceGate, or Orbital Pay. SmartPay doesn't seem to exist anymore. GiftPay is a crypto thing that maybe it's perfectly cool and reputable, but it gives me caution. Allegro prohibits the usual things, but under the guise of illegal adult content, which does make this a bit vague. I'm not sure if they are against the fictionalization of these things, which is legal, or only the actuality of these things, which is illegal. One is reasonable and the other is anti-art. At this point, I got tired of scrolling through terms of services trying to find statements on acceptable use. So many of them just did not have them available for public consumption. Some of the other sites listed on Porn Webmasters are gift card things, which is something that screams shady to me, and others are crypto, which given the past decade screams unreliable, unstable, shady to me. But okay, there are other payment processors out there. Even if some of them are still somewhat anti-art, they understand for the most part that erotic art is art. But here is another question. How useful can payment processors be when the banks and credit card companies refuse to allow you to pay for legal works of art in the first place? 4. Visa and MasterCard. To go through the trouble of quoting my past censorship video once again before diving deeper into this topic, MasterCard doesn't let you use it for depictions of non-consensual activity. That's going to include all non-con and dub-con fantasies. It's also going to include all non-erotic depictions of assault. As an assault survivor, I take issue with being told I'm not allowed to make art about my experiences unless it is sanitized, glimpsed at, or merely referred to. Sherry DeVille points out that Visa and MasterCard almost operate as a duopoly on the market. Sure, Chase, American Express, and others exist, but Visa and MasterCard have the majority of the market share. And that means when they collectively say jump, you better jump if you want your money. They are the ones you can blame for the ban on fake blood on OnlyFans and the like. Why? Are they afraid it's real? Do they think you're incapable of keeping documentations about its fakeness? Are they incapable of understanding that NSFW art is still art? It is fictional. It is not real. In that article, DeVille talks about how credit card companies and banks and payment processors don't want you to fool puppet someone. You know, and I wish I could just flat out say that on YouTube. I'm annoyed that YouTube doesn't want me to. I think that is censorship. You can't be a furry. They've historically been harsh on any form of bondage. They do not like choking. Wow, that sure sounds like all of the content that is restricted on OnlyFans. It sounds like a handful of businesses have decided that they are the ones who get to determine the limits of art and speech, which, in this case, are fictional and do not actually cause harm. They don't even encourage harm because depiction is not endorsement. They know this, though. Of course they know this. These companies aren't run by people with an inability to think. They are not college freshmen on Twitter and Tumblr. They are run by companies with agendas. Political agendas that seem to align with the religious anti-sex conservatives at Collective Shout. Remember how Collective Shout mentioned they managed success in one of their censorship campaigns after a meeting with MasterCard? The credit card company decided that they and an anti-art group in Australia should be able to dictate the legal speech adults can purchase and partake in across the globe. As a result of Collective Shout highlighting how they targeted credit card companies to enact their censorious goals, plenty of gamers, artists, and free speech enthusiasts have begun contacting MasterCard and Visa via online forums, calls, mail, and email. According to reporting from Polygon, several of those who have emailed Visa have received a form response which includes the following. If a transaction is legal, our policy is to process the transaction. We do not make moral judgments on legal purchases made by consumers. Visa does not moderate content sold by merchants, nor do we have visibility into the specific goods and services sold when we process a transaction. This is what we in the business of reading documents call a lie. If this email is real, and if this is what Visa is saying in response to people complaining about the censorship of games and adult art, they are lying. How can I say that they are lying? Simple. I read Visa's published core rules. Section 1.9.2.1, Acquirer Integrity Risk Requirements. An acquirer must ensure that a merchant marketplace, payment facilitator, ramp provider, sponsored merchant, or digital wallet operator does not accept cards for any of the following: the purchase or trade of photographs, video imagery, computer-generated images, cartoons, simulation, or any other media or activities, including but not limited to activities listed in Section 1.3.3.4, Integrity Risk and Use of the Visa-owned marks. Well, let's jump to that and see what it says. A member must not use the Visa-owned marks in relation to or for the purchase or trade of photographs, video imagery, computer-generated images, cartoons, simulation, or any other media or activities, including but not limited to any of the following: child sexual abuse materials, incest, bestiality, rape, or any other non-consensual sexual behavior, non-consensual mutilation of a person or body part. It's great that they don't allow it for CASM, but, well, let's see, the rest goes against that email they sent out. Art depicting incest, bestiality, rape, non-con, and violence are all legal. Depictions of non-consensual mutilation would include Star Wars, Game of Thrones, Bleach, Naruto, most violent video games, most violent manga, a hell of a lot of horror movies, and more. It's an idiotic policy when it comes to art, and a policy they don't seem keen on enforcing when it comes to major publishers and sites, but which they might selectively enforce against smaller actors without the legal teams and monetary resources to fight back against their anti-art censorship. And they do not clarify here any difference between fiction and reality. What do they consider bestiality? Is this intercourse with animals? Is it intercourse with monsters? How about shifters? What about furries? If a game centers around furries and implies furry sexuality through romance or the existence of children, is that unacceptable? How about mythological creatures? Does pup play, which is obviously between humans wearing those silly masks, count as bestiality? Does art set in a Nekomimi world violate these standards? Omegaverse fiction is a form of animalification fiction. Does that run afoul of these standards? When Visa says they only ban illegal purchases, at least as far as the United States is concerned, when they censor video games in the way Steam and itch.io were forced to, Visa is lying. They are banning legal speech and art. It just happens to be the icky art that they don't like from a moral perspective, in part because they don't really understand art. Fictionalized depictions of illegal acts are, by and large, legal, protected expressions in the United States. That is how the First Amendment works, despite what Visa may desire. So then, it seems Visa and MasterCard are on the same page about restricting legal speech and pretending that their hands are tied because they approve, as of time of recording, in my humble opinion, of restricting speech and destroying art. The YouTube channel Inside Games made a video where they said the blame is more likely on payment processors rather than on the credit card companies. The problem here is that the processors blame the credit card companies, and the credit card companies blame the processors. This way, no one has to take responsibility, and legal speech remains restricted because they do this runaround game. Censorship remains in place. Processors and credit card companies share equal blame. They are equally anti-art and anti-speech, and their ability to dominate the market and control our monies and thereby our purchases and speech is unethical. They are not helpless actors. And it isn't just them. Over on Blue Sky, Anna Valens points out that the storefronts are pointing the finger at the payment processors, who point the finger at credit cards, who point the finger not just at the payment processors, but at the banks. Sex workers are routinely debanked as a violation of their free speech. 5. Video games. Why might Collective Shout have aimed its sights on Steam and itch.io rather than Smashwords and art museums, which are filled with classic paintings depicting assault, violence against women, and other questionable sexual and violent scenes? Yes, I know, hard turn in the topic. The answer is somewhat obvious, especially if you've been paying attention to my complaints thus far in this video. I repeatedly say that these companies and groups and politicians seem to not understand or perform not understanding what art and fantasy are when you introduce sex to art and fantasy. They pretend as if eroticization takes something out of the realm of art. This is patently ridiculous, philosophically incomprehensible, and legally nonsensical. They think or pretend erotic art is not art. People also like to pretend video games are not art. Literature, painting, sculpture, film, these are all things that we have collectively embraced as art, and so it's harder to get everyone on board with heavy censorship of them unless you're talking about erotic films, or suddenly everyone pretends they're no longer films or fictional pieces of art because everyone likes to play at being stupid. I have a video diving into this question about whether or not video games are art and why it's debated so often. To make a long story short, it's more complicated than what I'm going to put here. There is no definition of art that excludes video games and doesn't exclude other mediums we've collectively decided are art. It doesn't make sense to say video games aren't art. Now, something I didn't delve into in that video is why people want to label video games as non-art artifacts in one specific way. Beyond snobbery or disdain for interactivity, there's another important aspect. We do not believe in such a thing as a literary addiction. We do not believe in a film addiction. We do not think there is a fine arts addiction or a theatrical addiction. There is no concert addiction or music addiction. But governments, aestheticists, evangelicals, and conservatives pretend there is such a thing as video game addiction. To pretend such a thing, they must pretend video games are not art. The lack of artness makes it easier to argue for stricter regulation, censorship, and destruction. You can demonize those who enjoy it. They also pretend pornography addiction is real. It's not. The goal is not to rid us of problematic, addictive, violently sexual video games. The goal is to implement an aesthetic, anti-pleasure, anti-art censorship across the globe on all fronts. Erotic video games simply represent the easiest first step toward this goal. Now, there are problems in the erotic video game industry. Based on my own experience playing them, there are plenty of games which involve delivering gifts of erotic films. These indie publishers likely do not have the rights to these gifts. That is copyright infringement. It is labor theft. Importantly, it is stealing the labor of other workers in a highly exploited, demonized labor force where it is difficult to make money and to be taken seriously. I find this a major ethical violation that I think developers need to have a serious conversation about. Part of that conversation, I think, would involve reaching out to smaller amateur models and erotic film actors, directors, and cinematographers about using clips of their works or stills from their portfolio in some sort of sharing exchange whereby you direct your players toward their pages, sites, and products. This would, of course, require an agreement where consent to use these GIFs and images is put in writing and becomes irrevocable so as to not destroy the final product if they later decide they don't want those images out there. Of course, this would likely require these developers to, like OnlyFans and other sites, receive and maintain consent decrees from all those in the original films and images. I imagine what those like Collective Shout would argue as to why video games are more reasonable to attack for censorship, including non-erotic games, is that interactivity increases the indulgence of fantasy, which increases the risk of one wanting to enact this fantasy in real life. This is a popular thought people have in society. It's the sort of argument put forward by things like Mindhunter, great TV show. It's the violent video games cause mass shootings argument, an argument which doesn't really have much merit in the evidence. Sorry. But let's pretend together for a moment that it does, and that we might ought to do something rather than censor. 6. The impossible sublimation. Sublimation is the psychological process through which negative drives or desires, which society frowns upon, are channeled into other drives and desires. Traditionally, this is unconscious. Traditionally, this is a sexual desire into a non-sexual output. One tends to see the idea that sexual energies are converted into artistic or athletic drives. I do not think sublimation must be from sexuality to non-sexuality, nor do I think it must be from socially unacceptable to completely socially acceptable. As I argue in Impossible Kinks, which I really should finish one of these days, one can sublimate a negative drive into a sexual drive, a negative drive into a somewhat more socially acceptable, yet perhaps still frowned upon drive, and from a negative sexual desire to a less harmful sexual desire. So for instance, a suicidal drive sublimates into a fatal vor kink. How does that qualify, you might ask? Well, this sublimation impossibilizes the original drive. Taking it out of the realm of possibility makes it so you cannot act upon it. One who has a weird fantasy which cannot be fulfilled may be judged for having it, sure, but that is better than that person killing themselves. It's a form of sublimation. Collective Shout, based on my reading of them, doesn't seem to know of or accept this sort of sublimation. If they did, they might realize that rather than the destruction of art as an attempt to destroy the drives leading to its creation, something that's not going to work, the likelier way to reduce harm is to push people with negative drives into having impossible desires. Impossible fantasies are inherently more seductive because there is no risk of fulfilling them. You can never reach annihilation. You always get the thrill of the chase. So what does that mean? Well, one who has non-consent fantasies, say, could be pushed towards specific non-con kinks which are impossible. Hypnosis does not work the way it does in the movies. Mind control is not real. There's no such thing as bimboification. In the Omega-verse, pheromones often lead to non-con and dub-con scenes. Humans are not actually driven by pheromones, and we certainly aren't made mindless or animalistic by them. That's science fiction. These are all impossibilities. They can only be achieved via art and consensual roleplay. Erotic cannibalistic fantasies can become impossible vor fantasies. Objectification fantasies can become impossible transformation fantasies, literal objectification, if you will. Breeding and pregnancy kinks can be channeled into impreg, whose tendency to focus around cis males is because that makes it impossible. If Collective Shout were a serious organization, I would expect them to support erotic games focused around impossible kinks, because no amount of indulgence in those can ever result in real life harm. They are impossible to fulfill, and the brain knows that. The person with such desires only ever consumes art and roleplay. Yet these types of weirder, more impossible fantasies are often the first sorts of things to be censored. This gives the game away, pun intended. It's not about protecting people. It's about censorship, disgust at sex and desire, and a need to control. 7. It's not just the bad stuff. I first want to state that there are several pieces of art that I've read, played, listened to, and so forth, which I consider morally bad. They are not pieces I want to consume or create. Yet, I will defend them and their right to exist. As such, I will defend the right of their makers to make profit off of them. I will not defend the sexualization of children, that's my hard line. But for instance, I thought the film How to Blow Up a Pipeline was a good film that happens to be dangerous and not well thought out, whilst arguing for terrible outcomes that its creators, based on interviews, didn't really seem to understand completely. I like that film as a film. I think it's morally and politically bad. I have no interest in its censorship. I find gore-based torture porn horror films to be absolutely disgusting. Not horrifying, disgusting. I despise them despite my love of horror and my penchant for writing grotesqueries in my own prose. Yet I have no interest in their censorship. I find the thought of real person fanfic outside of satire and parody, and even that has its limits for me, to often be disturbingly unethical. It strikes me, in my own conception of it, as very similar to AI deepfakes, a violation of consent, which I will personally never write and which I hope to not read. Yet I cannot bring myself to argue for its destruction. I think it is wrong to censor sex, violence, and even self-harm. When 13 Reasons Why received a massive criticism, I argued with my college friends at the time that the arguments for its censorship struck me as anti-art, even if the show itself was dangerous. I did not agree that artists are duty-bound to restrict themselves, as many were arguing at the time. Even if I agree it was irresponsible, which based on the evidence it maybe was, that does not mean I think responsibility matters enough to argue for censorship. We have trigger warnings and content warnings for a reason. I think we are all free to exercise and have a duty to exercise our rights to criticize, condemn, and protest works of art. I do not think we have a right to censor and destroy works of art, except in very few extremist edge cases such as deepfakes, revenge porn, CSAM, and materials which actively encourage its audience to go out and do harm either to themselves or others. Though also I think properly identifying that last one is likely more complicated, nuanced, and annoying than advocates for its censorship are willing to admit. I'm the idiot who will defend the problematic art, because I am an artist, and I believe strongly in the importance of art. But it needs be said, this is not simply about the icky things like many people will and have claimed. Stripe and PayPal ban all digital erotica. Itch.io de-indexed all of their NSFW games originally. OnlyFans was almost forced to remove all erotic material. Tumblr was once forced to remove all erotic material. As I point out in my video over Project 2025, the authors of the Mandate for Leadership want all erotic art, regardless of its spice level or kink level, made illegal. Collective Shout claimed they did not want all erotic games removed from Itch.io, but their website makes clear they are opposed to all pornography, by which they do not mean erotic film, but rather erotic art across all mediums. They are not merely opposed to the icky things, even if that is what they went after this time around. They're opposed to all of it, and they would like all of it gone. People like Girl Defined, the Catholic Church, Andrew Huberman, Jordan Peterson, and Melinda Tankard-Reist, who pretend that porn addiction is a real thing, will not stop at arguing against the icky things. They want to medicalize all consumption so they can ban all consumption. This includes a married man and woman and missionary messing around on camera for the sole purpose of procreation and showing other people what it looks like. They do not care about how gentle or vanilla you or your art are. They despise it all because it presents pleasure, and pleasure is their enemy. because pleasure presents a path to resistance and individuality outside of their small defined boxes of what it means to be a decent human as defined by their magic books. That means 8. It's not just NSFW. Project 2025's mandate for leadership redefines pornography. In their definition, any and all media that mentions or discusses trans people qualifies as pornography, which they would like to make illegal. They remove entirely the idea that erotica is that which is for titillation. Porn for them is not art which is intended for arousal. It is art which mentions or shows the things they dislike. Through banning porn, they wish to erase trans people from existence because they aim to define porn as anything which includes trans people. Let's recall back to the Stripe call person's potential misspeaking. They don't support LGBT content, this person allegedly said. In my video over Florida's Don't Say Gay Law, I examine how they imagine any mention of gay parents and families to be inappropriate discussions of sex. DeSantis' spokeswoman at the time claimed any opposition to the bill came from pedophiles. They would label and ban all artworks which involve LGBT people as illegal pornography. It would be impossible to list all the artworks which would be labeled porn and made illegal under the efforts of these people. I gave a non-exhaustive list in my Project 2025 video. But sticking purely with games, it would include things from Overwatch to Marvel Puzzle Crest to Dragon Age to Mass Effect to Baldur's Gate and more and more and more. Collective shouts opposition to violence against women and opposition to non-erotic games would, I imagine, lead to them opposing any violent game in which there are female antagonists or female victims, something that will quickly lead to levels of absurdity similar to PETA claiming that Pokemon supports the abuse of actual animals. Almost every shooter in RPG is suddenly on the chopping block. Visa's anti-mutilation policy will destroy violent action games and horror games. The medium itself will be trounced and obliterated. They call it addicting so they can label it as a substance and treat it as such. They would like video games to be seen the same as meth. They want them destroyed. But that's not all they want. 9. It's not just games. I've seen plenty of gamer types who are perhaps not as in tune with the art world and the erotic world claiming it's unfair that these groups are only going after games and gamers. This displays a lack of knowledge of history. They went after Smashwords and Amazon. They attacked literature. There was an art teacher who was accused of showing pornography for showing an uncensored photo of the statue of David. They went after OnlyFans and Tumblr. This is not about video games. This is about all art and all expressions, and they will gladly use the language of social justice to do it. You can't make art with women playing the didgeridoo because some religion doesn't like that. You can't make art depicting Muhammad because some religion doesn't like that. You can't make art about femboy Jesus getting pregnant via Judas because some religion doesn't like that. It's blasphemy, and this is something we're all supposed to care about for some forsaken reason. People have decided to babyfy their language due to social media algorithms rather than stand up to these sites and say, no, I will not say unalive or grape or corn star because you're too lazy to investigate instances of users actually violating your terms of service and would rather rely on bullshit AI detectors. Kids raised a fuss about the TikTok ban but did nothing about TikTok's own censorious attacks on language and seriousness. YouTube itself has problems with this. OnlyFans has a list of banned words meant to prevent TOS violations that result in people being unable to casually chat about their own age, their pets, their life, or have serious educational conversations about consent. Platforms have been shoving off their duties onto robots who know no nuance or context because these companies are lazy and they do not mind the death of language. I do. I mind it a whole fucking lot. Each one of these presents an attack on speech which they will claim is in place to prevent abuse, and that is a lie. It is because they cannot be bothered. Censorship groups will go on Save the Children More crusades just like Anita Bryant did in her attacks on gay people. They will medicalize pleasure and all consumption of art. They will label it as addiction so they can save us from ourselves. They will use the language of feminism to attack the expression and art of women. They will claim to rally against the fetishization of queer people in order to destroy the media about and by us. Governments are using erotica as an excuse to de-anonymize the internet. You must prove you're of age to use YouTube, to use Spotify, to use Discord, to talk to your friends, to listen to music, to read, to watch movies, to watch shows, to scroll social media. You must surrender your identity so they may log your habits and know exactly who looks at what at all times. They will ban VPNs. They will say if you are against having to hand over your identity in order to do any of this, that you are on the side of harming children. They will entirely deny that parents have a duty to parent and instead say we all must lose our freedoms of expression. Online safety acts and age verification systems sound proper in theory. I get it. It is easy to make it seem like opposition to them is immoral. Section 2, Concerned Condemnation, Subsection 5, Protection, from my first essay on censorship goes over the failures of FOSTA SESTA in the United States, a law meant to protect children and people who have been sex trafficked that did nothing of the sort, and instead led to mass censorship and increased violence. It goes over privacy concerns, RE age verification, from collecting IDs to biometric determinations to AI usage. But let's get more specific. The UK's Online Safety Act threatens the mass of knowledge that is Wikipedia, from its independence to the safety of its contributors to the abilities of internet users to freely engage with the information stored. The OSA is supposedly meant to protect children. Apparently that includes protecting them from knowledge. That is the censorship that we are all headed toward. The attack on erotic gaming is merely a first step. This is not merely about the death of gaming. The internet itself is headed towards death. Great firewalls are erecting so that we may all burn to a crisp, little flames of burning humans stomped out by authoritarian boots that claim to be benevolent and tell us we must lick them from adoration and gratefulness. What can we do? We are not doomed to this future, and there are several things we can do to fight this. In several countries such as Australia and Great Britain, you must fight to be granted an equivalent of the American First Amendment as it pertains to speech. The Australian government's classification laws are inherently anti-art, pro-censorship laws that must be fought by Australian citizens and artists. Contact your representatives, talk to your communities, organize protests, and fight for your ability to make art and speak. In the UK, continue to make a fuss about the Online Safety Act. The Labour and Conservative parties, as of time of recording, are steadfast in their support of it. They do not care about the amount of people who've come out to condemn it and ask for them to reconsider. They have labeled opponents as supporters of harm against children. Only Reform has come out against it. This is highly unfortunate as Reform sucks ass, but at least they are defending your right to suck ass on camera. I do not recommend supporting Reform, but I do recommend pointing out to Labour how this likely will affect them in the future. Point out how it goes directly against progressive liberal values. Point out how it's playing into Reform's hand, and who the fuck wants to do that? Ask them why they are so gung-ho about censorship and spying on British citizens. Ask them if they want to be the CCP. Ask the conservatives if they admire the CCP. I'm sure they'd love that. In the US, we have state and federal representatives to call and annoy. Rev up the libertarians and the Libertarian Party so they have something to do with their fucking lives. They will appreciate having a mission. They don't get many of those. Ask Republicans if they wish to follow in the footsteps of China. Ask why financial institutions get to control the free speech of Americans. Ask Democrats if they're smart enough to understand the path of authoritarian censorship such actions and laws take us down. We can push debanking laws that prohibit banks from shutting down your accounts due to lawful purchases, sales, or exercises of free speech. We might support a federal bank to appease the libertarians among us who hate the idea of telling private banks what they can and can't do, like whatever. This governmental bank would be disallowed from closing your accounts for those lawful purchases, sales, or exercises of free speech. This would provide a bank with no issues in the purchase of lawful content that others have decided to censor for you. We could tell the credit card companies that they are providing what amounts to a utility and therefore cannot be the arbiter of how they are used. We could, as author and AI enthusiast Thorne seems to be arguing in an introduction for a paper she's yet to put out, which I am interested in reading when she does, create a stable cryptocurrency for this exact usage, though this would have to get over, as she admits, the hurdles of crypto volatility and the general distrust the public has toward cryptocurrencies because of how they've been used as meme scams for the past decade or so. The ACLU has a petition calling for credit card companies to stop restricting legal speech and actions based on their puritanical moral desires that run contrary to the American ideals of free speech. Sign it. Write letters of concern to your representatives, Visa, MasterCard, Stripe, PayPal, Apple, Google, Wise, Cash App, and Venmo. Call them and politely voice your concerns or feign confusion at these policies. If you get told by Visa or MasterCard that they only restrict illegal speech, feel free to point out that actually their terms of service restrict legal speech, and you do not understand why they are lying to you. Or, if they're being truthful, why their terms of services are lying to you. If they insist on this lie, perhaps it is worthy to make polite complaints to your banks, to the Better Business Bureau, and to government bodies. Be sure on these calls to be polite and patient. According to comments on Blue Sky, Visa has taken to hanging up on people as of time of recording. They are annoyed at the influx of communication that does not appreciate their use of the market to censor legal speech, in my opinion. Of course, the solution is to cease censoring legal speech. Who would have thought? This should be pointed out to them. Email, write physical letters, call, sign petitions, talk to your friends and family, post about it on social media, like, comment, and share this, ha 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 ha. But that's just me being a silly YouTuber on that last bit. But vote. Make clear that your vote partially contends on support for free speech and art. And, importantly, some of you have got to run for office. Power is scary, I know, but shaping the world involves taking power. All that's riding on you, is the future of freedom. No pressure. Howdy, and thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, share if you're feeling saucy. You can join me over on Patreon if you would like, wherein you'll get these videos and others early. You'll also get to have some fun behind the scenes access to some of my art projects, some more personal vlogging style content, and you'll just get to support me and we'll get to chat about art a whole bunch, which is what I love to do most. You can go over to Amazon Smashwords or wherever you get your ebooks and purchase a copy of my poetry collections, Butterfly Snuff, and A Museum of Art and Eggs, both of which are also available in paperback and hardback. I have a second channel where I'm just reading through a bunch of public domain stuff for the fun of it and through my own work, so you'll get readings of these poetry collections and some short stories and some longer form fiction when I get around to it, and some plays. And I have a third channel where I'm uploading my music and art instead of having it all clog up this channel. So go support those if you feel like it. That content, a lot of it will also be getting uploaded early to Patreon. So if you want all of my stuff in one convenient space, Patreon is the place to go, which would be really cool of you, you know? I hope you have a fantastic day. Do not be rude in the comments. Do not go and harass anybody. And I will see you next time.